We have not done a good enough job of convincing Americans that less government, less taxes, and a more vibrant economy is really going to work for every American. And so I spent most of my life in advertising and marketing and research, and I want to go back to the battle of ideas. I just think unless we win the hearts and minds of the American people, we're not going to win elections with conservative ideas.
What always strikes every time you hear that people want less government is that indeed there are many things in life that should be less regulated, and maybe people need to be held responsible for their actions. However, is it not also fair to say there are those people who desperately need more government direction, for without it there would be chaos in public and in their lives? Let us dig into this as we welcome to MidPoint the former Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York and an expert in health policy, Dr. Betsy McCaughey. Dr. McCaughey, thanks so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. And the fact is that recent polls show that most Americans want to send a very clear message to Washington: leave us alone.
But what does that mean, Betsy? Okay, now, and this is why I wanted you and I to talk about this. We hear it, and so many times the politicians hit us with nothing more than rhetoric, which I think is pretty much an example of what we just heard. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it means they want government off their back. They don't want to be bossed around all the time. And that's true whether you're just trying to live your life or whether you're running a business. For example, Andy Puzder, who runs a big chain of restaurants worldwide, including restaurants like Hardee's, everybody goes to those restaurants. He's saying that it's a lot easier to open a new franchise in Siberia than in California because of all the regulations. And in fact, a study came out from Brookings Institution this May showing that business dynamism, which means business starts and expansions, that's what creates jobs, it has steadily declined since the last years of Reagan's presidency. Clearly, regulation is largely to blame for this. But even if you're not in business, even if you're just trying to live your life, look at Obamacare. It tells you that you have to have insurance. It tells you what your health plan has to include. It dictates how doctors treat their patients, even privately insured patients. So wherever you are in this world, you are being constantly pushed around by government, and it's getting to be too much for Americans.
All right, now I'm going to take exactly what you said and let's dig into this a little bit here. Because when you talk about regulations, granted, we have an awful lot here in America. Let me play the devil's advocate. There are certain health regulations that we need here in this country in order to make sure that people are kept safe. There are certain safety regulations from OSHA and others that we need in order to keep people safe. So then do we not need some of this government on our back?
We need some regulation. I'm not saying eliminate all of government, but it's gone way too far. Let me give you an example. The Clean Water Act. Everybody wants clean rivers, clean lakes, but now the feds are trying to expand the Clean Water Act to include the water in your backyard if it rains too hard. Can you imagine if every time the grass is underwater, the feds suddenly have control over your backyard? That's what they're trying to do. Rosa DeLauro, a Democrat from New Haven, Connecticut, just introduced a bill in the House of Representatives to slap a tax on sugary drinks because she says the federal government should be discouraging us from drinking soda. My view is that those lawmakers have a lot of nerve thinking that they're smarter than the people they're supposed to represent.
All right, now hang on. I'm going to stop you there because that's a great point, and I'm going to play devil's advocate with you. I love where this is going here because there are some people who will say, wait a minute, America is an obese, fat, out-of-control nation, all right, already. Kids' diabetes is on the rise, adult diabetes is on the rise, and a lot of it comes from the drinking of sugary drinks. So again, Americans just don't seem to know how to take care of themselves, so somebody better do it because health costs go up without it, people die without it. They need some help.
No, they do not need the federal government telling them how to run their lives. Pretty soon the federal government's going to slip a menu for the day under your front door. Those lawmakers who think that they're smarter than the rest of us should be ridiculed instead of reelected.
But maybe they are smarter. Isn't there just, wait a minute,
no.
a distinct little possibility? Again, I'm not advocating it, but again, it's the other side of the street. Or isn't there just a little possibility that maybe they are a little bit smarter than everybody else?
You think they're so much smarter than the rest of us? The rest of us don't spend 2.5 or 3 times as much as the money we bring in working. That's what the federal government does.
So then,
doesn't sound very smart to me.
hey, I'm just kind of asking. I'm playing the other side of the street here, making sure that we get every side covered here, because there are people who say, and I've even said this to some people too from time to time, there are some people in this country who, quite frankly, just aren't smart enough to run their own lives, and maybe they need a little help from time to time and somebody to tell them where they go. They can't figure it out on their own.
That's the start of totalitarianism. But the fact is, we ought to be taking an axe to the federal government and eliminating a lot of these departments, like the Department of the Interior. Why should the federal government own 80% of the land in some of the western states? We ought to eliminate the Department of Education. And when we eliminate those departments, which is perfectly legal, the Congressional Budget Office has already assessed the impact. If we eliminate some of those vast federal departments, we sweep away the regulations that are just suffocating us day by day.
But would we not almost sweep away maybe some regulations that are good for people at the same time, and maybe it's not all good to just throw everything out in one shot?
Well, the fact is that state governments could replace those with ones that are appropriate for their own residents and that people actually want. You can't tell me that the folks in Washington, D.C. know better than somebody in North Dakota what North Dakotans need or somebody in California needs. The fact is, Washington doesn't know best.
But isn't it also part, again, I love the fact that there's a good discourse on this right now, that you have politicians that are voted in from certain parts of the country. They're voted in from Montana, California, Ohio, Florida, Texas. They should know what their constituents want. They should know what's good for them at that point, but they don't pay attention to it because they have their own agendas. Is that fair?
Well, not only that, but they've spent so many years in Washington in Congress that they really don't represent the states from which they come anymore. They can barely remember what it's like to be back home.
Isn't that the bigger point, though, that simply put, when you get down, you have your local representatives, people who go to Washington, and in almost no time at all, they forget exactly why they are there. So maybe that's the thing that needs to be attacked first?
Well, that is the thing, and many of us have advocated for term limits, but it's not happening anytime soon because we have to get Congress's assent to that. In the meantime, we really should start taking an axe to the size of the federal government so those representatives in Washington do less lawmaking and less bossing around.
I'll tell you what we need to do, Betsy. We're all out of time, but next time we need to come on and we need to come up with a checklist here of those things that need to go, and let's see if we can make it a little better next time, because I think you've got the right ideas. We just got to put them all down on paper. That's all we need to do.
Well, that's right, and that's what Americans want before they go to the polls this November.
Exactly.
A specific plan.
And that's what we're here for. Betsy, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again. All right, take care. Next hour on MidPoint, is the president truly already on vacation, or do we just not understand the rigors and demands of the job? And after the break, Cityscape takes us north for politics and bears.